turns out Europeans and Americans prepare for trips in completely different ways, and some differences are quite strange. Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. I am Donnie, and along with my wife Aubrey, we are two Americans currently living in Germany with our baby, sharing all of our experiences living and traveling throughout Europe. We have been living in Europe, specifically Germany, for nearly 5 years, and as you would expect, we've become the ones that when American friends, family, or acquaintances want to travel to Europe, they come to for tips. And when European friends want to travel to the US, they also use us for tips. With this informal travel advisor role, and honestly with our own travels, we have made some interesting observations and American habits as to how they prepare for a trip to Europe that Europeans do not do when they prepare for a trip to the US that they might find a bit interesting. And that's exactly what I'm going to talk about today in my video. Leaving on a jet plane, don't know if these plans are sane. I'm originally from a southern state in the US called Oklahoma and now live in the southwestern German state of Rheinland-Pfalz. Therefore, some of these things are a bit more specific to these two places. Like this first thing that can't necessarily be applied to all of Europe, I don't think. But one of our big culture shocks when moving to Germany was how cash dependent Germany still was, and honestly still is a bit to this day. If Germans aren't using cash though, they will be using an EC-Karte, which is basically a German debit card. We can look at data and see that although cash transactions are decreasing, cash still accounted for 39% of payment methods at POS in 2022. Debit cards also were 39% and only 8% were with a credit card. Whereas in the US consumers use credit cards to pay for 70.2% of all retail purchases in-store and online, and 40% of in-store transactions are with credit cards. And with our higher infatuation with credit cards, a unique quirk of Americans preparing for a trip to Europe is that it is not uncommon for many Americans to look into opening new credit card accounts just for this trip. Now, you might be thinking they are doing it in preparation for all the spending they will be doing in Europe, and that may be partially true, but a lot of it has to do with credit card perks. For example, with some credit cards, you are able to access lounges at airports so you can travel a little more comfortably. With some credit cards, you get perks when renting vehicles, but more than anything, it's all about the points or miles. And often when you open a new credit card account, you get a sign-on bonus that can be worth thousands of points. Simplified, with purchases, you collect points or miles, and then you can later use these points or miles to pay for things like flights. For example, we've flown from Europe to the US and back a couple of times for free using credit card points, and have flown from Singapore to the UAE also just using points. So some Americans will be planning a trip, see they are some point short to cover a flight to Europe, and will open a new card to get these sign-on bonuses to get the points to then cover the flight. In contrast, with Germans' avoidance of credit cards, I have never heard of a German preparing for a trip to the US by getting a new credit card. But I would be interested in knowing from our European viewers, is playing the credit card game common in your country as well? And do you know people who do this prepare for an international trip like some Americans do? We all know the stereotypes that Americans are given by other countries in the world. Yeah, the overweight and out of shape type stereotypes. In fact, when I first came to Germany in 2014 as a foreign exchange student, one evening my German host mom looked at me and was straight up asking how I wasn't fat, even though I wasn't American. Well, one thing Americans do to prepare for a trip to Europe doesn't help with destroying this stereotype, and that's starting to walk to train for the trip. Look, it's no secret that Americans don't necessarily move much. We drive to get everywhere. So when Americans are about to go to Europe, a common piece of advice you will hear passed around by other Americans is, you better start walking now, so that they ensure when they get to Europe, they will not collapse from the strenuous load put on their form as they walk from gelato shop to gelato shop. Now, to be fair to my fellow Americans though, when you go on vacation somewhere, you typically do move more than you do in your daily lives, even if you are more active. Even for Europeans that may walk or bike to and from work and around town, if they have an office job, they probably will still spend 30 to 40 hours a week being somewhat stationary, whereas on a vacation where you aren't just lying on a beach, you will spend that time sightseeing. However, I have known quite a few Europeans who have taken a trip to the US, and I can honestly say I have never heard of a European who trains for their trip like this because, well, they are just used to walking already. The work-life balance between the US and Europe is obviously a point of very common discussion when talking about the differences between these two countries. In the US, you aren't guaranteed any paid time off for holiday, but the generally accepted normal amount of vacation is 2 weeks or 10 business days of paid vacation time. In Europe, this number is different from country to country, but for example, here in Germany, you are generally legally required to be given 20 days of vacation per year, but it is very common for companies to offer anywhere from 25 to 30 days starting out. Based on my observations, one effect of this is that it causes a completely different perspective on traveling. For many Americans, taking an international trip, maybe even especially a European trip, would be a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Partially because if you're traveling to Europe, you want to spend a good amount of time to make traveling that far and undergoing jet lag worth it, but you also have to keep in mind that you're going to need some vacation days for Christmas, Thanksgiving, just in case something happens with family and you have to take time off for that, etc. For Europeans, I don't believe they feel this same amount of pressure to only take one big trip abroad in a lifetime because they have so much more time off to play with. Therefore, one super common thing is that Americans plan a trip in a completely different way than Europeans. First off, as I mentioned, Americans won't want to take all of their vacation days, so they will only plan on traveling to Europe for like a week or maybe 11 days. And since it is their once-in-a-lifetime trip, they will want to see it all. For example, Aubrey's mother and father took a European trip when they were young, and they did something like 11 countries in 11 days. And this is how Americans typically do it. They will want to see the Highlands of Scotland, sip tea in London, lie under the Eiffel Tower in Paris, buy lederhosen for Oktoberfest, hike the Swiss Alps, visit the Colosseum in Rome, snap a few pictures at the Sagrada Familia in Spain, try port in Porto, eat chocolate in Belgium, see the Northern Lights in Iceland, and do it all in a week. But wait a second, on second thought, with as intense as Americans do travel Europe, maybe training to come over here actually does make sense after all and is necessary. Now, I do want to briefly say that this is something that is changing as younger generations of Americans are having a shift in mentality and are getting passports at higher rates than ever before and are traveling a lot more. So some are planning trips like they will come back one day, and they'll concentrate therefore their trips in less places in those days. Now, also, not to let Europeans off the hook though, some of our European friends have planned trips to the US. They were consulting us, and when they told us all the places they wanted to visit, we had to remind them about how ridiculously large the US actually is. Like how Texas alone is twice the size of Germany. So for them, it isn't so much a matter of trying to pack it all in one trip, but just a matter of it is really hard to fathom the true size and distance between places in the US. However, these same people have then said, okay, we will focus on California in this trip, and one day we will try and get back to see the other parts of the country then. Again, this is, in my mind, because of the different perspectives and expectations of what they will be able to do in this lifetime. And on the flip side, I do have to mention, because of how massive the US is, Americans may also fall into the trap of thinking Europe is so small that you can easily see a lot more in one trip. And that's another reason they plan on seeing 11 countries in 11 days. When Americans think of Europe, there is one thing they always think of. And when Europeans think of Americans, there is also one thing they always think of. Now, okay, these are absolutely overgeneralizations of both places. And again, you really can't overgeneralize an entire continent like Europe to all being top fashionistas. Prime example is how we were surprised to find European high fashion isn't necessarily in style in Germany. But because this is a thing Americans think of when they think of Europe, when they are planning a trip over here, this typically means they need to overhaul their wardrobe, of course, or at least they think they do. Americans will go shopping and try and find what they consider European fashion, which often just means nice or fancy clothes in their view. This can sometimes even mean European brand names or really just kind of preppy type of clothes. Which, by the way, if you are American and do this, you're not going to blend in as much as you think you will, especially if you're visiting places like Berlin, where the fashion is, well, completely different. And as Americans will try and walk from Scotland to Sicily and from Porto to Prague, this also means they will try and find new athletic shoes they can maybe pass as fashionable European shoes in their minds, but also are ones they can wear comfortably to protect their feet from all the abuse they will take that they are not used to taking. But again, this isn't a thing I have heard of Europeans doing for their trip preparations to the US. I have, for example, never heard of Europeans going to buy a new set of PJs to wear around Walmart, even though this is the stereotype they have for Americans. Now, this section I would like audience participation on in the comments below. I'm not sure if this is strictly an American characteristic or not, and I would like for our European audience to chime in on buying weird travel accessories. One in particular that comes to my mind is the money belt or fanny pack you wear under your clothes to hide your money and documents on your person. Note, I'm not talking about the across the body fanny pack, which is currently in fashion in Europe. I'm talking about the under the pants variety. No matter where you are traveling to, you will be out of your comfort zone and you won't know how to protect yourself necessarily, and so people look for ways of protecting their belongings. I get it and I don't have a problem with that. The only reason I bring this up is because I see people using this thing and I have worn one in the past and have weird experiences with it that makes me want to talk about this. When I first came to Germany in 2014, it was my first time ever out of the country, and I was given one of those money belts to wear. I kept some cash in my pockets, but most of the rest of my money belt. I wore this money belt under my clothes around my waist, so it sat right under my waistband of my pants. This worked fine and well until one day I didn't realize I was low on cash in my pocket and I had to pay for something. I didn't have enough cash and reached into my money belt to pull out the remaining cash, not realizing it looked like I was digging cash out of my pants. Now look, if you would like to wear it, absolutely go for it. I just avoid this weird look because maybe I'm the only one that has had that kind of a weird problem with it. But I would like to know, what are some of the weird travel accessories like this that you've seen that people use to get ready for a trip? To see who made it this far into the video, the random question of the week is maybe not so random actually, but if you were to recommend to an American one European city to visit, which would it be? Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I will see you in my next video. But wait a second. But wait a second, on second thought, I just avoid this weird look because why did it jump?